Jakub?
Okay, so I would like to ask you about connection between Salesforce and ESB. How generally you can establish trust between ESB in your system landscape and how to make the connection with Salesforce as secure as possible.
Sure. So how I usually recommend doing this is using MuleSoft as my ESB and the MuleSoft connector for Salesforce. And with the MuleSoft connector, that provides the security for logging into Salesforce. There's also some other ways you can do it. If you're not using the Salesforce connector, you can use named credentials to call out to an API endpoint in MuleSoft.
Okay, but could you remind me, out of the box, do you have one-way SSL or two-way SSL in this connector?
In the MuleSoft connector, I actually am not sure.
Okay. So as the follow-up question, because like SSL is one topic, but another is that anyway, you are going to set some Salesforce integration user and some user profile for this integration user. What we can enable on this profile to increase the security?
You can restrict IP addresses on the profile.
Okay, anything else?
For the security, for the user in MuleSoft, IP address, I can't really think of anything else.
Okay, I would say that enabling API only access can help a little bit because then nobody even with the credentials can use interface. Okay,
Yeah,
that's all
API
from
user.
me.
Yep, no, that's good.
Thank you.
Okay, so just going to ask a couple of questions around mobile. So let's assume that there's that there was a mobile element to your solution. Could you talk about the different types of mobile technology that you might consider for the mobile part of your solution?
Sure. So one second, I'm just grabbing some paper because I want to write some of these things down that you guys are mentioning.
Cool.
Okay. So there's different kind of mobile solutions. There's native mobile apps, there's hybrid mobile apps, and there's HTML5 mobile apps. So with Salesforce, I usually like to go when there's the requirement for needing to use like a camera or uploading pictures with the mobile app. And you can use the Salesforce Mobile Publisher to create both iOS and Android apps. It also gives you the connected app, which gives you the refresh token so your users can stay logged in. You could also use a hybrid app that can also use native features of your phones, but then it can be cross-platform. And then your option with your HTML5 is also cross-platform. It's not distributed through the App Store, whereas the native and the hybrid are, and you don't have the ability to keep your users logged in. There's also some, you get more security around the native apps.
Mm-hmm. And what features would you use to integrate, say, a native app with Salesforce?
You can use the Salesforce Mobile SDK.
Yeah.
And then you'd want to use a connected app and OAuth flow. It's usually user agent flow. You can also use SAML plus user agent for SSO with a mobile app. You can also use social sign-on.
Okay, and what advantages does the mobile SDK give you over a custom integration?
You get the Salesforce API, so you get platform functionality as opposed to having to write all of that yourself in a regular mobile SDK. I think I have to look into it some more, but I think it also has the security taken care of for you, whereas you have to write it all yourself with a regular SDK.
Okay, and what about offline? How's that managed with the mobile SDK?
There is a local database that it uses and it caches data.
Yeah. Okay, is that smart store? Is that the...
Yes, that's right, the smart store.
Cool. And anything for synchronization, or is that handled by the implementation?
For synchronizing data, yeah. So when you are online again, it will automatically synchronize.
Cool. Cool. Okay, that's it from me. Thanks, Johann.
Thanks a lot. Melissa, let's assume we have a website where we need to capture lead information. Can you walk me through the different options we have to get the lead into Salesforce and which you choose for which situation?
Sure. So the first easiest option is Salesforce Web to Lead, but that has a limitation. I think it's 500 leads per day. So if you're going to have a high volume of leads, you'd probably want to go with something like maybe form assembly, where you can build your own secure leads, and you can have this being publicly accessible as well on a public community or your own website. You can have form assembly publish forms to a public website, which then feeds the data into Salesforce through the API.
Is there any option which is native to Salesforce and around communities you could think of?
Besides Web to Lead, you could create your own form within communities, Lightning page.
Okay. Just follow up there. Let's say the requirement is you also have to submit attachments as part of the Web to Lead form. What would you suggest there?
Using Salesforce files.
Okay. Thank you, Jakub.
Okay, so let's speak a little bit about the data migration. Let's say that I would like to make data migration and populate fields like created date, last modified date, and field audit history, field history tracking. How we can accomplish these requirements?
So when you're bringing data into Salesforce through your migration, you want to populate created date and the field history tracking. So you'd want to enable field history tracking on your object that you're importing the data to. The created date, so you're asking if you want to overwrite the created date that would automatically get populated by the system?
No, I'm saying that, for example, I'm migrating data from my existing CRM, and I would like to set created date on some opportunities like for 2 years ago, let's say. Yes.
Trying to think if you can update the created date on a migration. I don't know.
There is a setting in the setup which you can enable to accomplish this. And as the second question, let's say we have requirements to keep field history tracking, so have the full history of the last 2 years of our opportunities, who modify what and stuff like that, because we're migrating, let's say, from old Salesforce org to the new Salesforce org. Yeah. And another topic is how we can bring this data to Salesforce. And the answer is that generally we can't update the field history tracking in Salesforce directly, but if we want, we can either consider using big objects or something like that to bring it as a separated entity, or another option, if we are using Tableau CRM / Einstein Analytics, we can just bring this data directly to our BI tool. So do not bother Salesforce with all this history and just keep it off platform.
So you're saying to store it in a separate object, and then in your reporting, you would merge it together.
Exactly, because for field history tracking, the setting which we can use for created date is not available, unfortunately.
So you can only update the created date with that setting.
And I think last modified date, like there's limited subset what you can handle during migration. Okay, thank you, Lawrence.
Okay, so just going to ask about external objects. So let's suppose as part of your solution you have an off-platform element which is exposing some information to Salesforce. Can you talk about how that would work through an external object?
Sure. So you'd have to set up an external data source, and then with that external data source, you'd have to set up an external object. So suppose you're using Heroku, you have to set up the external objects in Heroku, and then you use Salesforce Connect to then connect to Heroku to access those external objects. You use OData 2.0 or 4.0. I would prefer 4.0 since that's the latest adapter.
The difference between those two?
Nowadays, I don't think there's a whole lot of difference, but yeah, I will have to look into what that is now.
Cool. Okay. And are there any sort of limitations to be conscious of if you're implementing an external object?
Yep. You don't have record level sharing. If it's a high, you can also set your external objects to be high volume. And if they're high volume, you can't write to them.
Anything around reporting?
You can set them to be reportable, but if they're high volume, I believe you can't report on them.
Any limits for reporting?
I think it's 20,000 rows per hour that are returned through all OData operations.
Yeah, I think that, yes, 20,000 records is what I've known. So yeah, sounds good. Okay, and is there anything that you can do with is there any way that you can expose a data source which doesn't offer an OData adapter directly to Salesforce as an external object?
Yeah, so you could use MuleSoft to expose that data source as an OData endpoint. You can also use something like CData if you're not using MuleSoft.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you very much. Melissa, I see in your system landscape that you have all your connections with your to your ESB or to your ETL. Can you please explain the difference between an ETL and an ESB?
Yes, so ESB will provide ongoing real-time integration between your different systems, your source and target systems. It provides a message bus, which will provide error logging and automatic retry, whereas the ETL is more for initial data loads. So bringing data in from a source system to a target system, it does your transformation. You can build in logic to do deduplication. You can also build logic into your ESB as well to do your transformations, but the ETL is more of like a one-time use, whereas the ESB is ongoing, connecting all your systems to talk to each other and share information. So
let's say we have a nightly batch of product data which has to be synchronized to Salesforce. Which of the two tools would you recommend?
You could actually use the ETL for that, but I would actually just use the ESB because it would have more error handling. I don't know. I actually am not really sure. I think you really could use either one, but the justification on that, I am not sure.
Okay, but what's your final answer here? Which one do you recommend now?
I'm going to say the ESB.
Okay, thank you very much. Jakub?
Because that's actually usually how I set it up.
Okay. I would like to ask you about skinny tables. Could you firstly explain what are skinny tables and what are pros and cons of using them?
So a skinny table will help you access your data faster because it will create a subset of your fields with indexes so that, like, for reporting, it doesn't take as long to access your data. So the skinny table will actually take, so the way Salesforce has data in the back end is the standard fields are in one table and the custom fields are in another. So when you create a skinny table, it actually will put all the fields in one table for you. So you're not searching across multiple tables. So that's why it increases speed for reporting and searching.
Okay, but you explain only the benefits of using skinny tables. Are there any cons of using them?
You cannot include, I think it is formula fields.
But please notice, I'm not asking about the limitation. I'm asking what are the disadvantages of using them.
Oh, disadvantages. I'm not sure.
Okay, so I will think first of all that you need to contact Salesforce, and always when you are adding a new field, you have to again contact Salesforce support, so it makes impact on your general development process. And another potential issue is the fact that your DML operations like insert or update are going to be more time consuming because Salesforce must maintain 2 data tables in the backend. So you have a better performance on querying, but DML are slower. So it's always like trade-off. Okay, thank you. Lawrence?
Okay, so if you've got a element of your solution that involves implementing Apex sharing, could you talk about how that's actually done?
Apex managed sharing or Apex manual sharing?
Apex managed sharing.
So Apex managed sharing, you would want to use that only if you can't achieve your sharing through declaratives such as sharing rules, and so you would have to have an Apex sharing reason, and so maybe you want to share objects that in a transaction that actually don't have like a relationship, so it's not easy. You can't do that within a sharing rule, so you would write your Apex to do the sharing. Also, if you run out of...
So the Apex sharing reason, is that available for all objects?
Custom objects. Only.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yep. And so what was I saying? So if you run out of sharing rules, maybe you have to like create a lot of sharing rules for like portal users. You might want to use Apex sharing over creating out of the box sharing rules because you'll run out because of the limitation, which I think is 500 per object. 300 to 500, 300 and you can get it increased.
I think, yeah, 300 for ownership based, I think. And in terms of the actual implementation of the Apex managed sharing, how is that actually set up, and what are some of the things that you need to watch out for in terms of making sure that implementation works correctly?
Well, you would have to create your sharing reason through setup, and then you have to write to the share table with the sharing reason. Beyond that, I am not sure.
What would you do if the circumstances of the record change?
Well, if it's Apex managed sharing, it will be carried along with the record change. If it's Apex manual sharing, it will get deleted.
Okay. And if so, if you're sharing, say it shares to a user who's specified on a record, what might you need to look out for in terms of later updates to that record, and how would those be managed?
I'm not quite clear on the question.
So I suppose, so for example, what are the circumstances and the how would you adapt your solution to make sure that any changes are considered in the reassessment of that sharing? So presumably you would have some action to apply the sharing as the record is inserted, but would you need to do anything else to make sure that it's always sharing to the person that should have access as dictated on that field?
With the Apex managed sharing, I'm not sure. With the manual sharing, yes, you would have to, because when there's changes, it would not be carried through. Yeah, I'm not sure I quite understand that. Sorry.
Okay.
If you could explain it to me, I would appreciate that.
Okay, so I suppose what I was going for is just to make sure that it's not just about as the record is set up, it needs to apply the sharing, but then potentially you also need to have specific logic to remove the sharing if that user is then updated to be changed.
Oh, okay, so if you're removing the user, yeah, I wasn't really sure. wasn't getting that. So
sorry,
okay.
I probably could have been more clear. Cool. Johann?
Thank you very much. This is a good follow-up. Let's assume you have a community where you want to share the opportunity to a distributor. The distributor is a partner community user. How can you accomplish that?
So you can share through a sharing set.
Can you walk me through the process of a sharing set?
Yes. So in community settings, in setup, you would go to, so you go to community settings and setup, and then you can create sharing sets on, so you create a new sharing set, and for like, I would set one up for partners, and then you can specify the objects that you want to be part of your sharing set, and then you set up the criteria for each of the objects. So like you would say where the contacts account equals the opportunity partner account. And that's actually a great way to share opportunities, is setting the partner account on the opportunity.
Okay. Is there another way you could share opportunity cases or counts or contacts with certain partner community users?
You can create sharing rules.
Okay. In what situation would you recommend using sharing rules?
When you can't achieve what you want to do through a sharing set, or you already have a sharing set set up for an object to share a certain way, you need to do some other sharing.
Okay, let's assume first, scenario one, we have 2000 partner community accounts with each of them has 3 roles. And would you still use sharing roles to share that?
Partner. So the other thing I was going to mention is, no, never mind. So what was the question again?
Okay, coming back. So we want to share the opportunity with a certain partner with the distributor.
Was it multiple partners?
No, with only one. Each okay. Opportunity only one. For some reason, we and you say we could also use the sharing rules. So if we have 5,000 partner community users, can we still use sharing rules for that?
No, because that would hit the sharing rule limit. So that's a situation where you could use Apex managed sharing.
Can you walk me through why this would hit the limits?
Because you would have to create a separate sharing rule for each partner role.
Okay, why is that?
Because Salesforce creates a role for each partner account.
Okay, thank you very much. Jakub?
Okay, so let's say after we set opportunity stage to closed one, we would like to notify our ERP system that it started to make the order fulfillment. Could you explain how this kind of the integration can be implemented in Salesforce, and what are your considerations for choosing the correct technology?
Sure. So for that, where it doesn't sound like a scenario where you would need to get a response right away, so I would choose a fire and forget integration pattern. And for that, I would use a platform event, and you can create a process builder that can write to your platform event, and then the data is sent to your middleware, which then gets sent to your external system.
Okay, and why do you prefer to use platform event and not, for example, change data capture?
So change data capture I feel like that's more for synchronizing changes. So whenever updates are made to data, it's constantly synchronizing, where the platform event is saying this specific thing happened, and it's not pulling all data for the whole record set, but it's more like one record. That's actually something I've been in my head trying to think about how I could justify. So if you give me more explanation on that, I'd appreciate it.
No, it sounds very good. The only thing which I will add is that with change data capture, you have to make change data capture on the whole opportunity object. So we are going to publish lots of additional events which are not valuable for your listener, and you will probably hit earlier the Salesforce limits for the platform events, because it's exactly the same pool, but your answer was definitely correct. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at. So thank you for helping me a little more. Thanks.
Lawrence?
Cool. So let's say your solution involves orders, and there's an external ERP system with additional information about the order, and we're exposing one of the screens from the ERP on the against the order in Salesforce. Can you talk about how you would solve that requirement?
So to relate the data to each other?
Yeah, so we want to see basically a window into the ERP system to show a screen with information that's not held in Salesforce.
So you can set up a Canvas app to do that, where you can mash up the data from Salesforce and the external system. So if you're operating on the external data, you can take actions on the Salesforce data. You can write logic to do that.
Okay. And how's the authentication handled for that?
Canvas sign request. So Salesforce will create a sign request and send an OAuth token, access token with that, so that the system will then have access through OAuth.
Okay.
The connected app. You'll set up a connected app enabled for a Canvas app, and you can even, if you're doing single sign-on, you can also enable it for SAML as well.
Okay. And how does the ERP system know which order Salesforce is interested in?
Salesforce would send the order ID, so there would probably be an external ID for the external system that Salesforce would send, or Salesforce would just send the Salesforce ID to your middleware. Your middleware can have a lookup table that associates the Salesforce ID to the external system ID and knows which one to update. So that would be more for using the ESB, whereas if you use point-to-point, Salesforce would maybe have the external ID. But I don't recommend using point-to-point integrations if you're using ESBs.
Cool. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Melissa. This time around Heroku Connect in your solution. So let's assume we have an object which we synchronize between Heroku and Salesforce via Heroku Connect. Can you walk me through the implications of that?
Yes, so an object being synchronized from Salesforce will basically create the same exact data in Heroku. So it creates a copy of the data. So when you update or change data in Salesforce, it synchronizes to Heroku. If you delete data, it also deletes it in Heroku. So it's a synchronization between Salesforce and Heroku.
Okay. Is there any implications on your data migration strategy?
For migrating data to where or from where?
We are migrating data from a retired CRM into Salesforce and therefore also Heroku Connect.
So you're having Heroku mirror Salesforce?
Okay, we have Heroku Connect for the account object, and we have to import our accounts into Salesforce. How does this have any implications on your Heroku Connect?
Well, if you have your account object mapped to Heroku, yes, that would bring data into Heroku.
Any limitations around that?
Heroku Connect does not have limitations with the Salesforce API. So no.
Okay, thank you. This is Jakub. Can you give your Jakub answer around Heroku Connect rate limits?
I don't remember them so well. As far as I know, the one thing is that it's not fully real-time integration, so you have some delays. But for the synchronization of Salesforce with your Heroku backend, as Melissa said, they are outlisted from the API limits, so it's pretty good tool. What do you have in your mind, Johann?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, go ahead. No.
Melissa, maybe go ahead.
There are other limits, like say you're using platform events, you would run into limits with those. That's not excluded.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was around this not being fully real time, for example, which can have which you have to have in mind when you do the data load, because if you have some other processes running on the Heroku side and the data comes in and not real time, you might hit any issues of out of order messages, for example.
Yeah.
Let's assume you do some calculations based on the number of accounts or whatever, then you have to make sure that this is done after you do the data migration in Heroku.
Okay.
This is one of the things. Okay, thank you very much, Lawrence. Or was it Jakub, sorry?
Don't worry. Okay, so I can have a very quick question about governance. Could you explain how do you help your customer to set guidance for for governance about when to use Apex and development and when to use low-code development like flows?
When to use Apex like versus flows?
Like you know, the guidelines. Let's say you are setting the new governance structure in the company. You know that they are going to hire some folks who know Apex, some folks who know only declarative tools, and how you are going to plan their work in optimal way. So how to set guidelines, what should be done in which technology.
Okay, so I really do prefer to go declarative if possible. So if you have people that know flows, I recommend trying to add logic to flows or process builders. So maybe you have a process builder on an object that's already doing things that are similar. You could add your logic in there. A case for going to Apex is you already have some more logic in your Apex, and it's just easier to modify the Apex and leave all the logic together. So that's one criteria I like to use is keeping logic together instead of putting like one piece of logic in a process builder and then the same similar logic into Apex. Just because two people have different skills, I don't think that makes sense.
Okay, and what about code reviews? In Apex, you can do them quite easily, and in
Yes.
process builder / flows, it's not possible. How do you handle this?
So to do code reviews in Apex, I would recommend using GitHub, the Git flow. And so when a developer creates a pull request, it goes to someone to do a code review, and then they merge that pull request into the branch. Process builders do not have that kind of functionality. So you'd have to set up a formal process before activating your flow or process builder and then pushing it to your higher level environments.
Okay, and the last follow-up question. You mentioned a few times process builders, but are you really going to use them in the new implementations? Like, what are the pros and cons of using process builders instead of using flows nowadays?
You can, let's see, process builder, you can do things like create custom notifications. I don't think you can do that with flow. I've never done it. So you might want to use a process builder to do something like that, like create a push notification, or you can even send SMS messages if you have something like live message. You can call Apex from both flows and process builders. The one advantage that flow has over process builders is you can loop through records. So if you need to go through, say, a bunch of child records, you can do that, or you can also do lookups on records. So you say you need to get an ID of like a record type. You can go do that lookup, get the record type, assign it to your new record that you're creating. You can create records in either process builders or flows, but that's something you wouldn't be able to do in a process builder.
And what about the performance?
I actually am not sure about the performance between them.
Okay, so there is one very nice quick document about declarative tools, and generally the official Salesforce recommendation is to use flows whenever you can because they are much faster. And I'm not sure if it's officially said that process builders are in the sunset phase, but there is like very limited list of missing features in flows. For example, is change, is new are not available. But there is a roadmap to cover all these gaps in the next year. And then I've got the feeling that for the new implementations, you should try to use flows as much as possible. So especially on existing org, it's different story, but on the new org, I would probably try to avoid using process builders whenever possible.
Can you direct me to that document after? I would like to read it.
I think they are up to 10 times faster than process builder.
Sure, I will find the link and I will send it to you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
God, it makes me feel sad that I literally had that document open about 2 hours ago. So it might be easier for me to share it after. Could you talk about testing strategy? So could you just walk through the environments involved in a development process and what kinds of testing happens in each one?
Sure. So you have your developers working in their local dev boxes, or if you're using SFDX, they can be using Scratch org. So you start with dev orgs or Scratch orgs, and then I would recommend using a CI/CD tool along with GitHub. So a developer would commit their code to GitHub, and then an automatic Jenkins job, so something like Jenkins I'm familiar with, would run to make sure that their commit won't break the build. And then once it's, and then it can go for code review, and then a pull request can be done to merge that code into the branch.
Oh, sorry. Just as part of that Jenkins process, what would be happening for Jenkins to know that it's not going to break the build?
It would have to run tests, so it would run automated tests. So a developer would use unit tests. They can run the Apex tests. They can do things like using mocks and stubs for testing callouts. Then the automated tests are run when the Jenkins job is triggered. And then when the code is merged into the main develop branch, then the Jenkins can push that code through a Jenkins pipeline to a developer integration sandbox, which could be a developer pro sandbox. And that's where you're doing a smoke test of your build to make sure that everything's working together and all the changes from different developers are working and nothing's broken. And then from there, you'd want to push your stable build to QA, where functional regression testing is done. That would be in like a partial or dev pro sandbox. And then once it passes QA, the changes can be pushed to a release branch, which can then be pushed to a UAT environment. And this is all source-driven development. This is not pushing between environments. I don't recommend that. I recommend pushing from GitHub or whatever source control you're using. And in UAT will be the user acceptance testing, and then also the business and functional testing as well. Partial or full sandbox. And then from there, you can push it to a full staging sandbox where you want to do your load testing and your end-to-end testing, your performance testing, things like Load Runner and Selenium. And then once it's all good there, you push it to production, and then it goes into your stable master branch.
Great, thanks very much. And you mentioned we'd be using source-driven development. Could you talk about any special considerations that you would have around the members of your team that are working with declarative development? How might they be working differently under a source-driven development model?
So they would be working in an actual org, and then when the metadata is good, you can actually pull the metadata down and then chuck it into source control. So it's actually a bit of a different flow.
And would those members of the team do that themselves? Is there anything that we could?
You could have a release manager that oversees that.
Okay, thanks. Johann?
Yeah, following up on that, can you walk me through your test data strategy?
Sure. So you always want to have it like a sample set of data in your integration and QA orgs. That's why maybe QA you're using a partial, because you're just really testing the functionality. UAT, it could still be partial. You could also load full data sets using a tool like maybe AutoRabbit. Staging would be a full copy because you want to make sure you're doing your load testing and performance testing on an actual copy of production. So that would have all the data and everything that would be in production. So the higher you go, the more data you want to be testing with, and the more of a data set.
So you're telling me that in your staging environment, there is a full copy of the exact customer data available?
Well, you might not want to include PII. You can mask your data, or there's another word for it too. I just did it in one of my projects. What's the word I'm looking for? Is it obfuscate?
I thought only not natives cannot say that word. Obfuscate. Yes. Okay.
No, everyone.
Okay. How would you do that?
I think you can use a tool to do that. I forget. I actually asked this question because I wanted to know. So I'm not completely sure. I don't remember.
Okay. And when we stay with the section, can you walk me through your governance model you would recommend for this solution, for the situation?
So it depends on if it's single org or multi-org. If it's single org, I'd set up a central, and also global COE if it's center of excellence. So if you have a global deployment, you want a global center of excellence. You want to have an architecture review board, a steering committee that includes stakeholders from the business, a change advisory board. So when changes are submitted, they get to review them. Then those changes go off to the architecture review board that says, yes, this makes sense to include in our current development cycle, or no, we need to push it off. The change advisory board also helps prioritize, because everything coming from the business is usually immediate or urgent, so they can help decide the priority. If it's a multi-org, you actually want to have your main global center of excellence, but then you want to have an architecture review board per org or region, however you're splitting it up. And then, so you actually have to you want a governance committee per org and per area where you're splitting it up, so that they can oversee the local development and the local changes that are happening. And I think you want a local change advisory board as well.
In which, how can, if you have a multi-org situation, can you walk me through the implications of a multi-org versus a single org?
Sure. So multi-org, you'd have multiple development teams. So then you would have multiple repositories that all need to sync with a central global repository, which can actually be, that syncing can be set up through forking the repos and then syncing through Jenkins jobs. So when changes are made in the global repository, they're pushed down to the local repositories. And if changes are made in the local repositories, it checks the global and merges to make sure that it's got all the latest changes. So that's why you'd want to have your governance set up per org.
Okay, and on a bigger level, what are all the things I have to consider when I switch from a single org to a multi-org implementation?
So you need to, you wouldn't have a shared security model. So you'd have to think about the security for each org. You have to think about data that needs to be shared. Are these orgs going to be independent of each other, or maybe accounts are being shared? So you might have like global accounts that all orgs need to be aware of. So I'd recommend sharing that data through your ESB. You also have to think about security. So things like identity providers. So if you have a hub and spoke model, one org can be set up as your identity provider, where the other orgs are set up as service providers. Or I would actually just, if you're replicating orgs and then just sharing data, having an external identity provider.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so I would like to ask you about Service Cloud and entitlements. Could you explain me what generally is entitlement and how do we use it in the solution?
Sure. So entitlements are used for service requests. So say a customer buys a product, they own an asset, they have a maintenance agreement on that asset that says, oh, they can call in and create cases for 1 year after purchase. So that entitlement would have that defined, or maybe they have a certain number of cases that they can log. That would also be defined in their entitlements. The entitlement would be related to their case and their asset.
Okay. And how it works with case milestones? Let's say for this specific asset, we have the requirement to, I don't know, answer the new case in 24 hours. How we can accomplish this?
So you can use SLA, service level agreements, that say what the customer is entitled to as far as response times, and then the milestones. I haven't done it in a bit. They define if the SLA is being met.
Okay. And on the high level, if let's say all assets in our organization have exactly the same SLA, so always we want to answer in 24 hours, do you recommend to use entitlements or build service implementation without them?
Well, I would still recommend entitlements because you need to know maybe for how long that they have this SLA for. Maybe there's expiration dates.
Okay, so generally I like your answer. The last question was a little bit tricky because I've seen many times that people are putting entitlements in their solution without considering the alternative options. And the cons of using entitlements is the fact that you create under the hood lots of data, which sometimes is redundant. So if you have a very simple process saying that always you have to answer in 24 hours, then another option is to just go with case escalation rules and build a simple flow, which then follow up with customer or something like that. So it's always about pros and cons. Thank you.
Yeah, my question there is though, I think that would be more geared towards the SLA, whereas if it's, and as you can have an entitlement without an SLA, the entitlement would just say you get this service for a year. So here's the expiration date of your service contract.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense. Lawrence?
Okay. How long are we going for, by the way? Are we, Melissa,
Are you guys, do you want to keep torturing me forever?
Yeah, let's make this the last round because we are 45 minutes and only not natives have to endure for an hour.
No, I was just kidding. It's actually not so bad.
Cool. All right. Well, okay. I'll ask a couple on single sign-on. So you mentioned.
Come on, you're not. This is not fun. One of the last questions, and you come to single. Please explain me the layered flow of SAML and OpenID Connect, Melissa. Just joking, Lawrence. Go ahead.
You talked about a hub and spoke model for your multi-org scenario there. Can you talk about how you would set up the single sign-on between the hub and the spoke org, please? Sure.
So your hub org will be set as your identity provider. So you'd have to set up an identity provider, have a certificate. You'd have to set up a service provider. So you set up SSO in each of the service provider orgs, which then also you import the certificate from your IDP. And you set up.
Anything else you need to set up in the identity provider org? Other than
trying to think. Oh God, so what do you set up in the identity provider? I haven't done it in a while.
Something for each of the.
Oh, my domain. You just set up my domain.
So you need my domain in the spoke orgs.
Yes.
But there's something you need in the identity provider for each of the spokes.
You need to have an SSO configuration. Is that it?
What do you use to? So it's a connected app. You need a connected app per org.
Yes.
Okay, and how's the single sign-on secured?
With certificates. So your SAML assertions are signed with a certificate. So the certificate is in the IDP. You have to download it. You have to upload it to your SSO configuration in your service provider, and then in the flow. So if you're starting from your service provider, it sends the SAML request with the signature from the certificate, X509 certificate, and then the identity provider will parse the SAML and then verify the signature to make sure it's correct, and then send the SAML assertion after it does the authentication with the user. If it's starting with the IDP will just create the SAML assertion and sign with that same certificate. It was sent to the service provider, which then verifies as well.
Yeah, and which of those certificates are mandatory and which ones are optional, or which of the signing checks are mandatory?
Which signing checks are mandatory with their certificate?
So I think you described the hub org, the spoke org as signing the SAML request, and then the IDP signing the SAML assertion.
Yes.
are both of those mandatory to check?
I'm not sure.
Cool. I think it's just the assertion signing that's mandatory.
So when it's coming from the IDP.
Yeah, so you don't need you don't need to necessarily check the signature of the SAML request.
Okay. So
You-
when the service provider is sending the SAML request to the IDP, it doesn't have to check it. It's only when the IDP is sending it back to the service provider, that's when it needs to be checked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And
Cool. Thanks.
Okay. And my last question is around you inherit an org which has been modified heavily with a lot of code for the last 10 years. Can you walk me through your thought process around code refactoring and cleaning up the org?
yeah, this is actually a topic I had just got into with one of my new projects.
It's my favorite topic.
Yeah, and I've had to do it before, and it's not fun.
It is fun. Don't
it's not fun.
next time you call me up, I find it fun.
So how I explain this process is, if you're doing new development and you're touching code that's old, you probably want to look at that code and try to refactor it as you go. So that, this gets into the subject of technical debt. And something I've had to do before is maybe merging orgs, you have to combine code. So you really want to find your common logic within your code, where things are being done repeatedly. Maybe make some base classes where you can just call something once, as opposed to having it in your code 10 different times. So I focus on the functionality where work is being done and has the biggest impact. Maybe you have some performance issues in your org that's related to specific code. You want to focus on that code first as well. Maybe you're getting some locks. Your users are seeing really slow performance. So that's one way to decide also where to focus. And it's just where you're going to have the biggest business impact, because technical debt doesn't always have much business impact. So it's hard to justify spending time and money. Also, you can do things like you can even convert code into flows or process builders or something like that. That's easily maintainable.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's it from my side.
And we've done the round, so I would suggest to wrap up at this point.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Usually, Melissa, we do it this way. We give you now 5 minutes, and while Jakub, Lawrence, and I discuss our findings and then give you feedback. Is that okay?
Sure.
Just come back, get something to drink and come back in a couple of minutes.
All right.
See you.